Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your Hurricane Pro and HD video blog for the 26th of June, 2013. Thought I would take a look at sea surface temperature anomalies, something I usually do at the beginning of the week, but I was out of town yesterday and had to get the update done fairly early Monday, so I figured we'd take a look at this today, Wednesday. Anomalies are important, the departures from normal, and we can see in the eastern Pacific, really stretching out to the central Pacific here in the tropical regions right around the equator, pretty much a mix of neutral and colder than average, and a background of colder than average. As you can clearly see, there's no real solid areas in the tropical Pacific with positive anomalies, those departures from the average on the plus side, this side of the scale. And this is really important because we're going to be heading into the peak of the hurricane season in about 60 days or so, a little less than that, and we're not going to have an El Nino. That looks almost physically impossible at this point. It just takes too long for that to set up, and instead we're going to have this neutral pattern in place, maybe just slightly cooler than neutral in the eastern Pacific, while on the other side of North and South America, in the Atlantic Ocean, water temperatures are running above the average in the deep tropics, where the upward motion, the energy, is supposed to be. Yes, we do have this band of warmer than average water up here in the subtropics, but notice the cold area right here in between those two. So you don't have this entire Atlantic basin all kind of thrown out of whack, with everything being above normal, or average is what I should say, or just the North Atlantic running above average and the tropical Atlantic at below. This is the classic setup for a very busy August and September. We're not even into July yet, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then you look at the Gulf of Mexico, that is running significantly above the average as well. In fact, if we zoom in, you can see right around the northern Gulf here, water temperatures there easily 2 to 3 degrees Celsius above the long-term average, and right now it's not a problem. And luckily, a lot of this in here is fairly shallow water with not a lot of deep ocean heat content, but it's still very, very warm compared to the average, and that could be concerning if a hurricane were to come along. But again, that's pretty shallow water all through here, what we call that shelf water. But even out in the open Gulf here, where it's deeper and the ocean heat content resides, that water temperature pattern running significantly above the average too. Look down here, not sure exactly what to account this to, or to attribute it to. Kind of mix my words up there. What is making this so deep? Look at that. That's all the way off the scale at -5. Maybe that's just some kind of a blip or anomaly in the satellite data. Otherwise, right there off the coast of Colombia in South America, water temperatures at 4.5 to 5 degrees Celsius below average. And you can really see those, seriously, here in the eastern Pacific, very cold compared to the average. And then you've got the warm Atlantic basin, just a classic setup for a very busy hurricane season. It's going to become more important in the weeks ahead, and hopefully people are prepared. Looking at actual sea surface temperatures, this is just mind-boggling to me. You know, tropical weather notwithstanding, all of this area surrounding Louisiana over to Mobile Bay, water temperatures there at 30 degrees Celsius and higher. That is almost 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That's ridiculous. I cannot imagine how oppressive the air must be, especially right down here in south central Louisiana. New Orleans, for an example, down to the toe, it must absolutely be sultry at night with just oppressive dew points. And then you can see out in the Gulf some of those 30 degrees Celsius temperatures showing up. There's even one here right off the Isle of Youth, south of Cuba. And then everything else in this green is 29, which is your mid-80s. I mean, that's just very, very warm. Luckily, we haven't had any hurricanes to take advantage of this yet. That could be a problem later on if this doesn't get mixed up a little bit. Alright, so in the eastern Pacific, we have tropical storm now, Cosme, This was downgraded. It's really easy to see what's going on. Yes, it has a nice sort of umbilical cord, if you will, attached to the intertropical convergence zone. Lots of deep moisture available, but it's starting to move over colder and colder water temperatures, and that's just going to slowly starve it to death. And that's exactly what happens. You rob the storm of its energy source. The dew points get lower, the humidity in the atmosphere is lower, the energy in the ocean is lower, and it just dies away. Wait till you see this tomorrow, and then again on Friday as it continues to move on off to the west here. It'll just become a lower and lower cloud deck. It'll lose that deep convection almost completely, and it'll just be a low-level swirl, and it'll be pushed along by the surface high that sits out here over the Pacific. It doesn't reach as high in the atmosphere. The storm doesn't, so it'll be pushed more by the low-level influence of the surface high, and it'll just drift on out to the west here and not be of any consequence to anybody. Looking at the Atlantic Basin here too, things are nice and quiet. There's a tropical wave sitting out here, and maybe another one right in here. Everything else, though, we're in the dry phase of the Madden-Julian oscillation for the most part. Starting to see a little bit more upward motion try to creep in over here in the southeast part of the eastern Pacific, but it's going to be a little bit longer, several days more, I think, before we start to see a noticeable uptick in convection in the tropical Atlantic. This is the MJO forecast, and that's what I'm referring to, the Madden-Julian oscillation, and it's that wave of energy, upward motion that goes around the globe. This is where it is currently, just now getting into the eastern Pacific. We've seen that with Cosme and all that convection in the East Pac. Now, the Euro, the yellow line here that I'm drawing over with red, forecasting the MJO to go out into phases 1 and 2, which substantially, over history, increase the chance of tropical cyclone development in the Atlantic Basin. Interestingly enough, the Euro is by itself on this. The UK Met, which is this blue color, kind of dives it into no man's land, and then the GFS wants to reverse course and just kind of hang out here in the area in the eastern Pacific, really, never getting it into phase 2. The Euro is alone on this, so we'll see. Is the Euro wrong? Is it the one that's not going to be correct? Or is the GFS and the UK Met, for example, are they going to be wrong? So we'll have to see. The Euro usually pretty reliable at forecasting stuff like this, and if the Euro forecast comes to pass, this is a substantial MJO pulse for the Atlantic Basin, and things could get very active once we get into July. Looking at, I thought this was interesting, just a sort of an FYI slide. This is valid on the 4th of July. And you remember I was talking about all that very warm water in the Gulf of Mexico here in the northern Gulf. Let me outline what's what. There's the Carolina coast, there's Florida, and then outline the Gulf Coast for you, the Yucatan Peninsula, and Central America. So hopefully you see what's what. Here is the Bermuda High, and it's sitting out there just north of Bermuda, so classic setup. Look at the stream flow here coming around right out of the tropics from east to west, and then the wind flow bends to east-southeast to west-northwest, and then finally straight southwest or southeast out of the Gulf over the Gulf Coast states. I can't imagine what it must be like. Luckily this is not very strong. You're not advecting or moving laterally all that warm tropical air very fast, but still 5 to 10 knot winds coming in over the deep south here with very, very warm Gulf temperatures. Just a nasty, sultry pattern coming up as we get to the 4th of July. This is valid 192 hours out. Maybe some kind of a disturbance here in the Bay of Campeche. We'll watch that. This is still far enough out in time that that's really not the point. I was more looking at the pattern that you can clearly see that wind flow coming in right out of that Bermuda High sitting out here, that clockwise flow around the Bermuda High, pumping very tropical, moisture-laden air into the United States for the 4th of July. So get ready for that. Yuck. Going to be sweating if you're out there enjoying fireworks. Alright, so that's it for today. A look at the tropics and beyond. Again, I'm Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, my site. Always an honor to produce these videos for you on Hurricane Pro and Hurricane HD. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow.